Let me move on to one of the highlights of the evening, or maybe they're all highlights, which is the launch of our new chapbook. Now, I think I waved it around before, but there it is again. Lockdown Poetry, the COVID long haul turned out to be even longer than we thought at the time, but there you go, that's life. So tonight, this new book is going to be launched by Tricia Dearborn, and as I said, then we'll have some representative readings from the collection. So just to quickly introduce you, Tricia, because you're a bit of a star tonight and you'll be reading for us later. Tricia Dearborn is an award-winning poet, writer and editor. Her latest books are Autobiochemistry from UWAP and, great title, She Reconsiders Life on the Run, an International Poetry Studies Institute chapbook, both from 2019. Her work is widely represented in anthologies, including the Anthology of Australian Prose Poetry and Contemporary Australian Poetry. And she's been a guest poetry editor for literary journals, including Rabbit, the Science issue in 2020. She was a poet in residence at the 2019 Poetry on the Move Festival and a judge of that year's University of Canberra's Vice-Chancellor's International Poetry Prize. Tricia also writes fiction and was the winner of the 2021 Neilma Sydney Short Story Prize. So I'm going to hand over to you, Tricia, now that we know a little bit about you, to kick off proceedings for Lockdown Poetry.
Okay, thank you, Rose, for that introduction. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land I'm on, which is the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and to pay my respects to their elders past and present. I'm going to be reading this, by the way. I don't have it all memorised. I was delighted to be asked to launch Lockdown Poetry, the COVID long haul. For a start, it's great to see poetry thriving in challenging times. And Stephen Smithyman's poem reminds us that the pandemic began when we were already vulnerable, arriving on the heels of the terrible fires. You were just about to hear a plane go over. I'm in Sydney inner west. So just FYI. Yes, arriving on the heels of the terrible fires. We have survived the fires of summer, the coronavirus autumn, and now we lean into winter, uncertain and afraid. The anthology contains diverse work in a range of forms. The first thing that struck me when I read it was how many of the experiences detailed within the poems were familiar to me. The way the world was suddenly altered and remained altered is reflected in the title of Anne Elvy's poem, The World You Thought You Knew. Julie Prendergast writes in her poem, Hallway, who is to say what is useful now and what's not? And the feelings of many at some point in the pandemic are described in Therese, also known as Roxanne Bodsworth's When Lockdown Makes You Feel Like Crying. Philip Hall speaks for so many of us when he writes, I am unshaven, daggy, in worn black and grey tracksuit. Turn my page. Rose Lucas, in Year of Breath, writes about the building of quiet routines while we all stayed home and step by stumbling step found different ways to think about our lives. Angela Costi writes about the challenges of the home office in her poem Homework, and Dominique Heck describes homes where the bedrooms are full of humans, their avatars, screens and keyboards. There are also the effects on our non-human companions. Michelle Seminara writes, for months you watched perplexed, perhaps wondering why we walked and played less, or why I wept and drank more. Further afield, Anne Shenfield writes, I don't want to have to live in a world where people fight in the supermarket over toilet paper. I don't want to have to live in a world where people fight anywhere over toilet paper. The feeling of being trapped, no matter how valid the reason, was captured for me in Gayleen Carbis's The Pool. How I long for the luxury of agonising over whether or not to go. Some poets describe the consolations of escaping the monotony of indoors. Simone King, in Lockdown Diary Day 66, writes, We cross a threshold into anemic light. At Edgar's Creek, we step into bubbling over rock, lorikeet song, honey eucalyptus, blooms of early wattle. And in Anne Carson's Prelude to a Storm, bird, tree, sky, and the way they cohere consoles me for all that is out of my control. One of the most difficult things about lockdown was the way it separated us from the people we love, as Tricia Dearborn explores in 12 Days of a Pandemic Christmas, which I think she's going to read for us later. While lockdown separated us from the rest of the world, it also linked us through shared experience. Nicola Humphreys in the UK writes, "That was the year when time stood still, when every day was like another." But of course, as Davina Bedford writes, are we really all in this together? Because lockdown didn't affect everyone equally. Lorraine Macia-Maponella writes about the experience of lockdown for those already locked out of society. As the pandemic progresses, we are packed like sardines in graveyards, having been forgotten in rundown barracks and hotels. Anthony Mills writes about how flushed-faced police, huddled under the paralysed sunlight of winter, patrol the marked tower doors of the dispossessed, where, as Sarah, I'm sorry, I'm not going to try and pronounce your name, I know I'll get it way too wrong, says, days later, too late, food is delivered, expired, and medicine promised never comes. I feel like Victoria should get a special mention, having really copped the worst of Australian lockdown. So to finish, I'll quote two Victorian poets. First, the beginning of Michael Leach's Winter Waves. A second wave of COVID-19 floods northwest Melbourne. Melburnians wave goodbye to transient freedoms. And in Jennifer Compton's It Must Be August in Melbourne, she writes, I had always thought that desolation would somehow be more personal, with literary references, more exquisite and consummate, and not quite so damn desolate. I urge you to pick up a copy of this varied, vibrant and moving book, maybe a few copies. Christmas is just around the corner. And to finish, I'd like to say that I'm very happy to be launching Liquid Amber Press's very first anthology. Here's hoping it's the first of many.
Thank you so much, Tricia. Really appreciate that. Fantastic. And I guess if we were all together, we'd sort of look at it and clap and talk, wouldn't we? So, you know, yeah. And I hope it's arrived for most people. It's certainly in the terrific. Okay, I've only got a cup of tea, but you know, there you go. The impulse is there. Thank you so much. Okay, now we've got a couple of readers. We would have loved to have everybody again, of course, but we've got Anne and True and Dominique who are going to read for us. So let me just find Anne on the list and pop her up. There she is. Anne Elvey, as well as being a dear friend of mine, is a poet, editor and researcher living on Boon Wurrung country. Her most recent poetry book this week is Obligations of Voice, just out from recent Work Press. Thanks, Anne.
Thank you, Rose, and thanks, Pauline, for Liquid Amber Press, and thanks, Tricia, for the launch speech. I want to acknowledge, though Rose has already named it, that I'm here tonight on Boon Wurrung country and pay my respects to the elders past and present. So, the world you thought you knew. Grieve how it begins in this cool carriage of lumber. Night sounds are conducted across suburban streets. A freight of tracks slight give over sleepers. Ghost passage for those who must work away from home. There's a small bouquet of lavender dying in a hand. A matter thought has changed everything. Time is given to be counterfeit and lovely and ear-gathering, like scent is to nostril. Tone's pulse calls forth the train of what might have been. Future generations haunt resistances. The word climate signs what devolves as spoiled and common good. There's no pending for worlds lost or stretched to fit the alterity that survives, will be, and is almost livable. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Wonderful. Yes, clap, clap. And let's move on to True Dowling. I'm just going to find her there. Yes, True S. Dowling is a poet, performer, editor and writing teacher for Bendigo TAFE and Victoria Uni. There's a few of us Vic Uni people in the mix tonight. Her poetry has been awarded, read or published in Australia, Ireland, the UK and USA. And her verse novel, Butcher, Baker, His Story Maker, was published in February 2021 by Birdfish Books. Thanks, True.
Thanks, Rose. Thanks, Anne. That was beautiful. 12 Days of a Pandemic Christmas. Haiku from the Edge. Our house is growing smaller. Doors shut. You zoom loud from another room. Emptiness sits by the lake. I walk, masked in sunshine. Ducks chevron past. Virus ISO blares from media devices. You won't speak to me. Surprised by a tire-marked back, tiny legs, blue tongue in the driveway. Life. Roadside lemons, free in a barrow. We U-turn, blinded by sun. Car park, sparse a week before Christmas. Shoppers lurk in aisles. Stare joy. Darkness gifts more poems. Branches converge, ghostly, beyond my window. Magpie gargles dawn tune. On my neck, your breath's uneven rhythm. Checkout chick chats to girls behind me. Touch card limit has changed to less. Rain splatters tin, slips under door. My head is filled with letters unwritten. Stars blink Christmas lights. Breeze huffs, paper rustles. We sing for tomorrow. 9 places set. We're thankful family can come. 5 seats stay empty. Thank you.
Thank you, True. And I guess our question is, what will it be like this year? Yeah, there we go. Thank you very much. Okay, Dominique is our other reader as part of the launch. So I'll, yes, there's the image of Dominique. Dominique is a Belgian-born poet living in Melbourne. She writes across genres and sometimes across tongues. Her works include a novel, 3 collections of short stories and 10 books of poetry. Tracks from 2020 and Songlines 2021 are her latest. Thanks, Dominique.
Thank you, Rose. And I acknowledge that I write on Wurundjeri land. I was trying to capture actually a sliver of the land and the beautiful sky today, but then I noticed I would have been just a black shadow, and I thought it might have been a bit of a statement. So I will just read my poem, Interlude. Another lockdown. Your pen interrupts itself halfway through a lane. You hug the sky, come out of hiding. The lounge is littered with photo paper, twine, sticky tape, a notebook, bubble wrap, and 4 phallic sculptures lying on their sides. The kitchen is a tapestry or leftovers on plates that don't match. The bedrooms are full of humans, their avatars, screens, and keyboards. Lambent light beacons. You steal out of the house in search of a point. Climb the rocky escarpment past the rickety ridge. Skitter down to the creek. Dogs and people everywhere. Wattle in the air, sound of a bagpipe. You cut across the wetlands, survey the plants. Tussock grass, paper daisies, spey grass, everlastings, orchids, lilies, periwinkles, maidenhair. Your heart leaps up at the sight of scarlet run-up, and the word turns where it means to go. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dominique. Fantastic. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, readers. Thank you, Tricia, for launching the book. Can I just say before we take a bit of a break too, what a privilege it was to be involved in this project, to put out the call. Did we all feel like we had something to say about lockdown? Yeah, I reckon we did. We probably still do. But to put out the call and to hear people read first and then to work on their text and submit it, and to have this come together as such a powerful and original body of work. We're really, Pauline and I feel very honoured to have this as our flagship kickoff for Liquid Amber Press. So I think, Pauline, you popped the link in the chat a little while back. You might want to do that again. Who knows? I know all the contributors have got their contributors' copies. But do support us. Do buy copies of Lockdown Poetry. As I think somebody said before, what nice person, I didn't even pay them, said it would be a great Christmas present. Perhaps it was you, Tricia. Okay, so thank you very much. Wonderful celebration of that book and the collection of words, which are so nicely framed by Sharon's images. You'll notice it's her lockdown isolation makes me on the cover, and then on the preface page there's an image of Dan and the numbers, that ubiquitous Zoom screen.